everyone. Thank you for joining in. It means a lot to us that you've chosen to spend your Sunday evening with us. Well, Sundays in general are very, very sacred, aren't they? Whether it's lockdown time or not. You must really love the sound of our voices, and so you keep coming back Sunday after Sunday. I'm joking. I know this has nothing to do with IDEX legal or the grey matter. It does have a lot to do with our guest today, who is, well, a very, very accomplished lawyer. He's been a practicing counsel for over 4.5 decades. He is a designated senior counsel. I'm told he's a magician in the courtrooms because every time he walks in, he casts quite the spell. Well, I don't want to waste too much more time. I'm going to make my last line of introduction. I'm told he's very gentle, suave, humble, and kind. He's definitely kind because he's been kind enough to humor us and get onto this show and agree to get, well, unsuited. So without further ado, presenting Mr. Janak Dwarkadas. Thank you, sir. Good evening. Thanks for being with us. And I'm going to hand over.
Thank you for inviting me, and hello, everybody.
Hi, I'm handing this over to Vikas Vich, my colleague and friend, who's going to pick it up from here and start off with our first segment, which we have very innovatively called the interview. So Vikas, over to you.
Super. Thank you so much, Tanisha. And thank you, sir, for being the second guest on our show, The Unsuited.
It's my pleasure.
Great. So let's go back a couple of years, go back to your kind of childhood and the journey of becoming a lawyer. Because you mentioned many times that you were shy and reticent when you were a child. So how do you go from that to becoming a counsel, which demands a whole different skill set? And it's a very different ball game for someone who's shy and reticent.
Could you repeat the last part? I didn't get it.
Yeah, it's very much, how did you, as a shy, reticent person or child, end up joining the law, and especially starting a career in counsel?
Well, it's a long story. It's very difficult to compress 4 decades of your life, but since you started at the beginning, yes, I was extremely shy and a very reticent child, and I never in my school or college days took part in any dramatics or elocution or any form of activity where the limelight would be on me. So it was, of course, a huge transformation to become an arguing counsel as I became later. But if you ask me what changed along the way, I would say that there were 2 or 3 things which in that sense made the difference. The first, of course, being that being a child born and raised in a family of lawyers, without you're realizing it, you are imbibing to some extent the law. It's like being born in the family of musicians where, unknowingly you are exposed to it. And so there were a lot of law books around the place. My father was a counsel practicing. My granduncle was a very successful solicitor. My uncle was a successful solicitor. The law being discussed all the time. And so in that sense, I was already exposed without realizing it in my younger days. But during my schooling, it was almost like a pattern that every report card, for whether it was a terminal exam or a final exam, would have a red ink remark from this class teacher as well as the principal to say, very shy, needs to speak up, does not participate, poor language skills, etc., etc. And there was not much changing as I went along. But somewhere around the 7th or 8th grade, my father, realizing that I really needed to do something to, if I wanted to be successful. Of course, nobody knew what I would be doing, but he felt that it was important that I should get a private tutor. And in those days, there used to be a Parsi gentleman. And again, hats off to the Parsi community. They are probably the most dedicated people that I have come across. And I can say that after being in the profession. A lot of my friends are Parsis, and I'm very, very grateful to them for the encouragement and the dedication that they have displayed. So this gentleman was an elderly gentleman. He was a retired teacher, and he took it upon himself that he was going to change me. Why, I do not know, but I'm grateful eternally for that, because he used to come home and he would be home before I returned from school, because my granduncle had a huge library of some 3,000 books, and
Wow.
he would be reading because the books would be, I mean, there was anything and everything under the sun in that library, from poetry to plays of the year to literature to you name it. I mean, history of the world and photography and whatever you could ask for, it was all there. And he was so immersed in short stories and Bertrand Russell and George Bernard Shaw and Shakespeare, the collected works. And he, as soon as I came home, there was no formal teaching. It was not as if he would sit me down and say, okay, let me see what you did for in school today. You'd just be reading a book and start immediately, as soon as I sat down, read loudly a passage from, say, Shakespeare or Bernard Shaw, and you just explain the deeper meaning of the words. It was a very informal kind of teaching where he actually made me develop the love for the language. Till then, I never realized that English could be such a beautiful a language in which you could express yourself in so many different ways. You pick out a book of poetry and just start randomly reading a poem and tell me all about its deeper meaning and explain it to me. So that was one huge turning point, because it suddenly, I think, again, in a very unknowing way and without a formal teaching method, it improved my language skills. And I showed that in my results. And ultimately, I did very well in my senior Cambridge exam. And after that, there were the other big change that took place was that my father insisted that I do a course on public speaking at the Indo-American Society, because of the shyness that I had and reticence to stand up in public. So that made another huge change, because it kind of made me aware that when you did get up on stage, the nervousness actually disappeared. In my case, I mean, I don't know, I
Mm.
cannot say about everybody, but in my case, I found that it was only a matter of getting up there. And that's what made the huge change. And the last thing, of course, was thanks to a friend of mine who actually is no longer in India, he's in London. But he actually took me along with him to hear Ram Jethmalani argue in court, and he also took me to one of the lectures of Nani Palkiwala on the budget. And those two left a very deep impression on me. And finally, when it came to the crunch, contrary to all that I had been proclaiming to my father that one thing I'll never be is a lawyer, I ended up in the profession. So that's the story. And I wasn't very nervous when I did finally get up to argue, as indeed in the beginning I used to feel.
I have
That's an
just one
amazing
question.
story.
That's a lot of
Yeah.
stories woven into one. Thank you. But I have one question. Did you, Mr. Dwarkadas, go back to any of your school teachers or the principal and say, "Hey, look what I made of myself now"? Did you do that?
Not really. I lost all contact with my school for some reason, and but when we completed 40 years of leaving the school, we had a kind of a reunion, a class reunion, and we met some of our teachers. And obviously, by then they had heard, about me, and so it was, it was a different kind of reunion for me from the time I used to run away from them in school. So it was interesting. It was very
Correct.
interesting.
Okay, that's good.
It's,
Where did you school at? Now that you've talked about your school so much, I'm
My
just
school
curious.
was Campion.
You went to Campion. Okay, super. Thank you.
it's actually also a very inspiring story for young kids today as well. So to know that, you can be shy, reticent, and not know, and having maybe a fear of, public speaking when you were younger, before the work that your private tutor, your grandfather did with you. It's very inspiring for even parents to say, look, even with this kind of, reticence and shyness, you could still make it if you get the right coaching and the right support. There's no reason you still can't make it as a great lawyer, great public speaker. You can overcome those fears. But also very inspiring from that front as well.
Yes, that's true. I think it should be a lesson for all parents, if I may say that, and probably even for people who join the profession or who are trying to find their feet in the profession, that it's not all that, it's from a distance it looks very daunting, if I may put it that way, and it may appear to be beyond your capacity, but it's not all that fearful as it looks. It just requires you to pick up courage and train yourself. The main thing is to train yourself, and I think you can do it.
Yeah. And how old were you when you made your first public appearance then? The first, on stage, when you said you spoke for the first time? How old were you then?
Well, I mean, the first ever appearance I made in court was in court, of course, and if that's a public appearance, because before that, the only time I must have got any kind of exposure to the limelight would be in the privacy of a moot court in law college, because in those days, moot courts or mock courts were not as rigidly, they were not as compulsory, and they were not as rigidly followed as they are now. So I did get some exposure of having to argue a case in a mock court in government law, but that was only one instance. Thereafter, the first ever appearance in court was in court, and it was a very short matter. In fact, it was an adjournment brief. But in those days, we were always told that whether it's an adjournment brief or whatever brief, you have to read it up. You have to know all the facts. The court would expect you and could ask you questions, and you ought to therefore read up the brief. So it was the first time ever I read what was called a brief, and went there pretty well prepared. And of course, that, as I said, the nervousness is there before you get up, but once
Yeah.
you open your mouth, it wasn't all that bad. So I felt very good after that.
That's fantastic. And what was your first appearance? Do you remember that case?
I can't remember that case, but it was. I remember the courtroom in which I appeared, and luckily it was before a very, very kind judge, Justice Mehta, and it was courtroom number 2 on the ground floor of the High Court. And
Wow.
as I said, it was only a brief to go and apply for an adjournment, but the judge was very kind. He probably, he was kind to juniors generally, not to me alone. So I was fortunate that he treated me with kids' gloves, if I may put it that way, and gave me the opportunity to speak, knowing probably that it was the first time. So I think the judges know by and large, who's a newcomer and who's a veteran.
Yeah. And just on that point, like you were saying, the judge was very good at kind of spotting that you were new and, not going too hard on you and supporting you. You've also helped, you've had a book authored on your family. So it'd be great to understand this role of mentors and who you would consider the member in your family that most influenced you in those early years.
Well, I got the book authored by a friend of, the wife of one of my juniors, Sifra Lentin. She's a known historian. She's authored quite a few books, and I had broached the subject with her, and I had told her that, look, I never realized till some publisher from Delhi called me up one day out of the blue and asked me if one of my grand uncles used to be a freedom fighter and had written a book of his struggles during the freedom fight and his association with Nehru and Gandhiji and all that. And he said, "Do you know if your grand uncle Jamnadas Dwarkadas came out with the second edition of his so and so book?" And I had absolutely no clue. I didn't know what he was talking about, in the sense about the fact that he was to write a second book, etc. And he had a very deep association with Gandhiji. So I had heard whilst as a child growing up, and we used to meet my family, different members, and I gathered that they had played a big role, but I never realized how important a role they had played, or how significant a role they had played. And I had my grandfather, who had six brothers, and my great grandfather. In that sense, there used to be a joke in my family that if somebody was asked which are the seven wonders of the world, then one of my uncles used to say it's Dwarkadas Dharamsi, my great grandfather, and his six children. And that would please the whole lot of them, and they would have a merry cackle about being called the seven wonders of the world. But all this came back to me suddenly when this publisher from Delhi called up and asked for this second edition, and then I made my inquiries, and I found that there didn't appear to be a book like that. So on that thought rankled in my mind for quite a long time before I picked up the phone and I asked Sifra Lentin if he could help me, write a book which I wanted to write more because I wanted the generation that is going to grow up after me and was not exposed, like my children, my nephews, my nieces, my grandchildren, who were not exposed to the family because they've all grown up in nuclear families, to get to know their pedigree and where they come from. So Sifra said that would be a great idea, and she told me that look, the best way to go about it is to get hold of two qualified research scholars, and you will be amazed how much material there will be on your family in the archive. And I honestly never ever believed what she told me till those two girls we engaged. I mean, the amount of material they gathered from the archives, I was shocked, and it was an eye opener for me as a member of the family to discover the kind of stuff that my great grandfather had contributed, had done for the community, for the growth of Bombay, having been a sheriff at one time, the role he played in the trial of Tilak, and how he stood, bail for him, and he participated in the trial, and so many things of the houses that he had built, and which still, even today, two of them still stand at Flora Fountain. I happened to visit them then and even later. And my granduncles and the freedom struggle and the fight and the closeness to Gandhiji, and particularly Jamnadas, who I mentioned earlier. There are two statements of his which I'll never forget. And in both, he kind of chides Gandhiji. One is on the Swaraj movement, where Gandhiji is promoting, people to stand up to the British and to strike against the British, etc. And he said, if you are going to encourage people to stand up against the establishment and to go on strikes for every little thing, as in when we get independence, this will get seeped into their system. And you will find that they will do the same thing when we have got self rule and we are in power. And that seems to be happening even 70 years or 75 years later, as we can see. And the other thing he kind of disagreed with Gandhiji on was this call for prayer all the time. And he says, well, prayer is such a private and personal thing. Don't please make people join you in prayer and worship, because it will make them lazy. They will think that they don't need to work. prayer is the answer. And now you can see how true those words were, where you can't forsake work for religious activity or for, all these. So I think that was a interesting thing I discovered. And this is all in the archives. Whatever I'm saying, I didn't know about it. It was
Yeah.
discovered through the archives. But the person who influenced me the most as a child growing up was my granduncle Trikamdas, who used to be a solicitor, senior partner of a law firm called Kanga and Company. He was virtually the founder, and I happened to be his favorite nephew and a pet of his. And again, as I said, I didn't know, but I grew up amongst law books and lawyers. So I used to visit him at his office at Ready Money Mansion at Flora Fountain virtually every Saturday. He would insist that I go there. He would take me to his favorite shop, and I could buy whatever I wanted, like chocolates and this and whatever. It was up to me what I wanted. And he
Yeah.
spoilt me silly. But he was very, very successful. He had some of the best clients that anybody could ask for, like Maharajas and industrialists and whoever, you could name them, businessmen. And I would see what success meant. I saw what success meant firsthand because every New Year's Day, that is a New Year according to the Hindu calendar, from 7 in the morning, and this is not an exaggeration, from 7 in the morning to 7 in the evening, there would be a string of visitors who would come, and they would be all highly placed industrialists, businessmen, uh, 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 people in commerce, and his clients and Maharajas and their the people, ministers sent by them, coming with gifts full of there used to be a room next to his bedroom. By the end of the day, that room would be full of gifts. It would be fruit. In those days, used to get fruit baskets. I remember with colorful wrapping paper around it. That room would be full of those baskets of fruits and flowers and gifts and pens and mementos and whatever. I mean, it would just mesmerize us. We used to have children just stand in a corner and watch this constant flow of people. So, in a sense, he was, of course, my hero, and I think he has inspired me to a large extent to join without my knowing it, to join the profession and learn about success.
Oh wow,
That's
those are
phenomenal.
actually great stories, and this book that you authored sounds so interesting, and I really wish we could all probably have a book for each of our families, because like you rightly said, it almost becomes a vibrant advertisement for future generations, right? To hold very close and feel very proud in terms of lineage. So
Yeah, it's
that's just fantastic.
unfortunately I published it for private circulation, so it's not so many people have asked me if it's available, and I have to disappoint them and say sorry, but I can share it with you all if you like.
So we're close now after this hour of chatting with you. So
I
I'm
would
guessing
say
You're,
you will
I
give
would
you're
us
part
an
of
say
the
offered
unsuited,
copy, signed
after
part of
copy,
the
signed.
unsuited
after
family.
the interrogation, I think so.
You'll wait. You'll save that one. Well done, Mr. Dwarkadas. Okay, so speaking of family, speaking of the personal space, and I understand you also grew up in a very large family. I think a 26-member family, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, yes.
So that's a lot of people that you grew up with, and I'm sure you had a lot of close relationships within the family and such, right? But as for all of us, there is always adversity at some point waiting to knock on our doors, and we're curious to ask you, did you have a particularly challenging time in your life, which was really, in a sense, almost sometimes it seems like, how am I going to tide over this? Did that happen at some point to you? And if it did, can you share that with us? It'll be great to know what may have happened and what you learned from it, really.
Uh, yes, I think the first thing I would like to tell everybody is that life is never a straight line. And nobody should ever believe that, when you see somebody at a certain point of time in their lives, that that's how it has been right through. It can never be possible because I have a simple saying in my mind that there is no life without problems. I don't think anybody can say that I've never had problems in my life. It's just how you learn to deal with them. I think it's very important that we must learn to accept that life is going to pose problems. It's just that you must know how to deal with them. If since you asked me, did you have those moments where you felt, how will you get over it? Well, I have to say yes. And there were a few years in my life, say from the year 1990 to 1995 in particular, that 5 year period was one of the most challenging, I would say, that I've gone through. Because whereas professionally I may have been kind of, settling down, if I may use that expression,
Sure.
and I thought I was kind of doing well enough. I
Okay.
can't put it better than that. But I, my first wife was diagnosed with cancer. So for the next 3 years, it was a very challenging time to first and foremost to learn to come to grips with the fact that at the age of what I was just 45 or so, uh, there is a good prospect that I may lose my wife and the mother to my two sons, and it could be, you know, it could go any which way. It takes at least 6 months or so before your mind can adjust to that shocking, you know, discovery.
Reality.
Yeah. And then as your mind starts accepting it, and it's like, why me is like, it's like a ringing bell almost right through those 6 months. It's you have to go through it to understand what it is, because it's, you just don't know what it is, why should it happen to you, kind of a thing. And and it was difficult for both of us because but she was much much stronger than I was. And I can, but for the fact that she displayed that strength, and she often probably supported, she was a greater support for me than I was to her. I may be very honest about it, because the first promise she took from me was that whatever happens, she will not let it affect my work. In other words, she will not demand from me the time or attention that I would have to give up my work to be able to be with her. It is easier said than done. There were times when I can only give you an illustration to establish what I'm saying. There are times when she would go self-driven to the radiation center at Kolaba. My mother would accompany her. They would be waiting in the waiting area. She would be chatting away with all other patients, laughing, joking. And when the nurse would come, invariably she would go to my mother and say, Mem Saab chalo. And she would say, Wo nahi, hum patient. And then she would drive back on her own, self driven. So this was the kind of human being she was.
That she was, the
And
person she was.
it made a huge difference because I could continue. I used to travel a lot for my work in those days. I could continue to travel. Never once did I feel that I was not by her side. I mean, the phone was always there. And only right at the end, I would say about a week or 10 days before she actually succumbed, she called up when I was in Delhi and she said, I think you better come back. And it was the end. And it so, but at the same time, so that was a difficult period for me. It was very as I said, to keep your balance, your mind, and not to lose your ways. It's not that easy. But then after that, the challenge was to deal with the kids, because she was always there for them and I was now a single parent. Fortunately for me, I met somebody who's my present wife, and soon after, and then we did get married. But soon thereafter, my father passed away, and I was again quite young at that time, probably just about 50 or so. And he was the breadwinner. He was everything. He was my friend, philosopher, guide. He was there all the time. And suddenly to lose two people who are very dear to you in a very short span of time, it's very difficult to handle. It's not. And he died suddenly. There was no history. There was no illness. Nothing. He was in Patna for some case, and I get a call from the hotel where he was staying that your father has had a heart attack. And I said, okay, I'm making my way there. And in 10 minutes, I get a call and said he's passed away. It was as sudden as that. So, to deal with that, and in the profession which we are in, one thing I have learned through all these difficult times is that you cannot wear your emotions on your sleeve. You cannot afford to let the world know what you are going through. Grieving is a very private process, and it should, if you were to display even the slightest sense of loss of balance or strength or character, or show that this is set you back, I can assure you the world will pass you by. They will do all the clicking and clucking and sympathize with you and say, oh, what a sad thing, etc. But there will always be somebody to replace you. So you have to, whatever it takes. That's one thing that I've learned from this process is how to pick up the pieces, how not to,
Just
show
hold
what
it
is
together.
happening inside
Yeah.
you, and to move on in life. And I think to some extent, my senior, Mr. Chagla, I have to give him credit because whenever I've had these difficult times, he and Roshan, Iqbal's wife, they have been there like a very, very firm pillar of support. And I must say, they have been there not only as a support, but even as a guide that look, you can't let this get you down. Move on. You come to court, come to chambers. You cannot sit at home. Don't let it get you down. It will be okay. You will be okay, kind of. And that makes a huge difference when there's somebody who's pushing you along.
And who's got
So,
your back essentially, right? To that
yeah,
extent. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It was extremely personal and also very heart-wrenching to just hear. So the thought of going through that over that 5-year period is literally crushing. And I'm very thrilled to know that you now have found love again, and touch
thank
wood,
you.
it's all going very well. So that's the good part, right?
Thank you. Thank you.
So we have our next question. Again, it's a little more on the EQ side than the IQ side. So we wanted to ask you, with all the litigation that you've been seeing over these last almost 4.5 decades, I'm sure there's some insight you get into the human psyche, just human, how do human beings treat conflict? Is it ego that comes into play? What really happens there? Can you shed some light? You don't have to talk about a specific case, but I'm sure you've just overall seen a certain pattern in behavior, perhaps. So if you can just throw light on that.
Well, see, there are litigations and there are litigations. So I have been on the commercial side more often than not.
Right.
So, and mostly corporates.
Sure.
Whereas there is, say, family law litigation, where emotions take over everything, and there is no balance left because the objectivity is completely gone. And that's why
Right.
you see family court litigation is something which is, I mean, for me personally, it's very difficult to handle. Like anything to do with marriage, divorce, or even guardianship or custody, particularly custody of children. You cannot, I cannot describe to you how heart wrenching the whole process can be when human ego and human emotions make the children a kind of a tool, a bargaining tool, and it can be, it shows the worst side of human character. Let's put it that way. So those are some of the matters which I did, and I have at great, very reluctantly I took them up, but it showed me that ultimately the failings which we have as human beings, whatever we may call ourselves civilized and whatever educated or whatever you want to call yourself, really nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. And you will see it every time, every day, if you are in that court. So that's one part of human failing, human psychology, and how it can, how manipulative human beings can be when it comes to succeeding or wanting to succeed in their course of litigation.
Right.
But when you come to the commercial side or the corporate litigation side, there is a greater degree of objectivity in that sense, because you may be a legal head or legal whatever manager, but at the same time it's the corporate battle. But
Correct.
then again, what you do find is that within corporates also there is a lot of tussle between legal and the business side, and
The business side. Right.
it's always, you can feel it when you're in the room, when you're taking instructions, when you're dealing with a matter, when you see people come to give you instructions, you can see the conflicts that are going on between legal and business. And again, it tells you how much of the role ego has to play, even in matters where you may not, it may not affect you personally, but it affects you personally not on the stakes, but it affects you personally in your growth in
Right.
the corporate world. So you can see that actually for yourself. What you also see is that another part of human failing that you see is how clients believe. There's a myth that lawyers are liars, and if you want, the lawyer will tell you, how to, what you should say or not say. Well, let me
Right.
tell you, it's exactly the other way around. We try to encourage clients to speak the truth. We have in all these years, I have never ever ever told a client, don't say this or say this, or if you say this, then this will happen, or if you don't say this, no. The rule is very simple. We are sellers of, or peddlers of legal solutions to existing problems. It is our job to provide a solution to a legal problem. The legal problem arises on the basis of a fact situation. So I always tell the client, you know the facts, not me. Please do not distort the facts. If you do that, you will go to jail, not I. I don't want you to say anything which is not correct. Please stick to the facts. It's your affidavit, it's your oath. So don't try to change that. And invariably what I find is clients trying to, they think, if I were to say the truth, then probably, the lawyer will think that, I don't have a great case. So they always try to hide it or say something, which they think might go against their interest.
Favorable.
So
They'll
it's an
come up with
interesting,
something they think.
sorry,
They'll come
sorry.
up with something. Will they
Yeah,
come up
they'll
with
try to,
something
pack it
favorable?
someday. So it's that this is the part of human psychology that you see. And the third part that you see human psychology in play is when you are before a court of law, where you're dealing with a judge, and you realize how much of the justice system, as we call it, is dependent so much on what the judge thinks of what is right and what is wrong, and not what you think is the law and what the facts are. So it's a very interesting mix. You learn all this as you go along, and that's what makes our profession so fascinating.
True. Thank you. Those are three good shares. So there's, if I were to sum up that, would you say it's ego, manipulation, and the third one being personal biases at some level, right?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay, super. Thank you for sharing that.
Super. Moving on to that, like you said, like you've had many successes in the career you've had so far over 4 decades. You've You've done it all. You've built a great reputation. You've probably had a successful career as well in terms of materialism. And then now at this stage, what motivates you at this stage to keep going and keep, practicing the law?
I can only say one thing: nobody can rest on their laurels. It would be the beginning of the end if one were to do it that way. I would answer that question with a simple example. Can you expect the top-notch surgeon who's about to perform a surgery after he's done, say, thousands of the same type, to say, okay, now I've saved 2,000 lives in my career, so I can take the 2001st patient easily? I mean, for that patient, that's his life. For us, as I said, every matter is as important as the last one, because for us, it may be one of the many. For the client, it's the only matter. It's that fellow's matter, it's that person's case. And he comes to you because you have built a reputation. And now, at the stage at which not only me, but people in my level at my stage would be fighting to keep our reputation more than worry about the client's case. In that sense, the case is important to that client, but our reputation is equally important to us. So when somebody comes to us, they come to us because of the reputation which we have built over the years, and it takes years and years to build and probably minutes to destroy. But it is for us to see that we provide the service which the client expects out of us and which he is looking for. So there is no question of what, in that sense, motivates. The motivation is the very reputation that has been built over the years, which you cannot afford to let go under any circumstances. So that is very important, and nobody, you can take it from me, no successful professional in whichever field will ever practice the profession differently from what I have just told you.
Hmm. That takes a lot of toil as well, like mental toil to keep going, keep protecting your reputation, keep waking up every Monday morning, hitting the court to keep going. So how do you manage to keep going professionally and also have this professional and personal life balance?
Well, I think my role model for that would be somebody like Roger Federer. He is a perfect example of how to maintain a professional and personal life balance. When I read his interview and I contrasted that interview with Djokovic's interview, I mean, I'm a big fan of Federer, I realized the huge difference between the two sportsmen. Whereas Djokovic is every minute, and you can check it out on Google or YouTube or whatever. Every minute of his day is monitored. Every minute. When he sleeps, whether he's sleeping, he's awake, whether he's eating, whether he's sleeping, whether he's practicing, whether he's playing. It is monitored, and there is a slew of professionals who are doing it. Whether it's heartbeat, or how much he consumes, what kind of food he eats, etc., who he meets, where does he meet, where does he go. Federer, on the other hand, goes back to his family. He crouches on his knees and plays with his children. He doesn't care a shit what's going to happen, on the next day or the day. He'll take it as it comes. He practices. There's no question. No professional can do without. But he's able to play when he plays, or rather work when he works, because for him playing tennis is work, and play when he can play with his kids and family. So I think it's very important to maintain that balance, because I had seen this one little question, if I may put it that way, that was in one of the aero bridges of a small advertisement in an aero bridge of of one of the airlines put up by HSBC, if I'm not mistaken. And the question was, well, it was an advertisement, but the question has remained with me. What are you working for? And I would say every one of us, whichever stage we may be, we should ask ourselves this question: what are you working for? So if you are working because that's what gives you the pleasure, please go ahead and do it. But if you want to work towards, so you should have some goals, short-term goals, long-term goals. And if you have a family, and if you want happiness, if you want to enjoy the success, the fame, the money, then you have to make the time. So the only way you can do that is if you are able to take time off and enjoy and smell the flowers, and and not just become a workaholic.
So do you so when your work is over, like do you switch off? Do you say like it's 7 o'clock, I switched off, it's now family time, personal time? Like are you that, like what Federer does? Do you follow that kind of mantra as well?
I'm sorry, the volume is not.
I'll
I'm
say
not
it
able
again.
to.
Yeah, I know I don't have as loud a voice as Tanisha, so I will speak loud.
I can do it
I
for
was
you, Vikas.
Just can you
I was
please, because
saying
Yeah,
I was
I'll repeat
saying
it.
I will try.
Okay.
I was saying, do you religiously kind of follow that mantra? So you finish work at whatever, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and then do you clock off and then say, right now, no disturbance, I'm with my friends or I'm with my family?
Oh yeah, I mean, uh, I have I have had to change over the years, because there are, in the beginning, the demand on your time as a professional is far greater. As they say, law is a very jealous mistress. So what happens is that in the beginning you have to make the time for your work. But it doesn't mean that you have to spend all your time. There are Saturdays, there are Sundays, there are evenings. And I personally feel, as much as the practice of law has kept me busy even in my junior days, uh, I find taking time away from your briefs, away from reading, not all the time, but the time that you can spare, and each one will require there's no one size fits all. So I know how much time I require away from my work to be able to think better. Some people are not able to think as well unless they are reading. So I don't recommend that everybody follows a strict pattern, but I certainly switch off in that sense once I leave the office. Now when I say I switch off, it doesn't necessarily mean that the mind will not, that at the back of your mind, your cases will not be kind of going around and round in your head. In fact, the best answers come to you when you least expect them, and when your head is not buried in those papers. So I would say it is actually of, of great importance to know that the answers sometimes are achieved when you give yourself time to think rather than time to study.
So what you're
That's
essentially
fantastic.
saying is Deepa ma'am thinks you're having tea with her, or your sons and grandchildren think you're watching a film with them. But what you're actually doing is probably thinking of that next big case and how you're going to strategize that. Is that
No,
right?
no, no, you don't. Please
No,
ask
no,
Deepa, because she will tell you that in any event I never listen to half the things she's saying.
See, now that's a whole different problem. We have marital counseling for that, Mr. Dwarkadas. We will touch base with you separately, okay? Because that's not just your problem. I think it's in every household that we women feel so unheard. And no matter how much you hear us, we will still feel unheard, right? So we'll address that on a whole different forum another time. So
Yeah,
yes, Vikas, moving on. You have the next
super.
question.
Yeah, I think before we move on to the next round, because it'd be great for you to share. You mentioned flowers in this conversation right now, and then the conversation we were having a couple of days ago with you. I think it would be great for the audience to also hear some of your personal passions, and also that you are a successful winner at growing roses as well. In your past.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tanisha. There's something about the volume that is It's not,
I will.
I'm not able to get
Don't
the
worry.
question. Can somebody?
I'll repeat it. I'll
Yeah,
repeat it.
yeah,
I'm audible, right?
yeah, you are,
Yes.
you are. I'm
Super.
sorry, yeah.
Vikas, no
No, it's
problem.
Because
okay.
I'm sorry, I think there's something with the mic that is not making your voice come through. Tell me,
Don't
Tanisha,
worry.
Okay.
what is it?
Yes. So I will repeat what Vikas said. Since you brought up flowers, right? He said, can you talk about this one time where you, I think, had a passion for growing flowers and
Ah,
how you went ahead and I think you've won, you've been a winner of a contest where you had to grow wild roses or something to that effect?
yeah. Sorry, because I couldn't get the question. But yeah, I mean, look, as a child, we as you were told, I grew up in a joint family. We had a family house, and we had a 3,000 square foot terrace above. So, which was basically for us to do what we like because only the family occupied the whole place. So, as a passion, maybe I'm a nature lover from birth. I don't know, but I started growing uh, long stemmed roses, and I became a member of what is called the Rose Society, which is actually based in Pune. But I discovered in the process that these long stem roses in a city like Bombay, which the climate of which is completely unfriendly to growing of roses, required far more care and involvement than one would think. So that made it more challenging, if I may put it that way, and that made me kind of, take it up even with greater vigor. And I did participate in some contests, rose shows or whatever they're called. And yes, there was some prizes I had won for growing those long stem roses. So it's been an interesting journey for me. This was, of course, as a child.
Understood. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Vikas, does that answer your question?
Well, it does. And a bit more on that, because before we move on to the demonstration round, you also told us that you are passionate about organic farming as well. I think that would be great to talk to the audience about.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as I said, I've always been a lover of nature. For me, just to see things grow has been a fascination from childhood. And very recently, I, I bought some land outside of Pune with the idea of putting to practice uh, what I always thought ought to be the way the world should feed itself, and that is organic farming. Now, it is, I can assure you, if you want to know how cruel nature can be, of course, this time that we are passing through couldn't be a better example. But let me tell you, if you want to know how you have to learn to adapt with nature, you should try your hand at growing even one tree. Because I can tell you, if you have put in the time and the effort to grow a plant or a tree or anything, you will think 20 times before cutting it the way we mercilessly destroy nature around us. But this organic farming was something I took up because I realized that we are consuming, and the spread of cancer and these kind of diseases are are more to do with the kind of food, particularly vegetables that we are consuming without knowing where they come from and what goes into growing them. And when you see, how the farmers have been just pumping the soil with fertilizers, chemicals, and spraying the vegetables that they grow with all sorts of pesticides. I mean, I'm sure we city dwellers don't know what the hell is going on. Until you actually go and see it for yourself, you will not. I mean, when you see it, you will probably think 20 times before consuming those vegetables and where they come from. So, this was what actually motivated me. And I now have bought some land, and with the help of some IT professionals, who have given up their professions and were like-minded as I am. But they didn't have capital and they didn't have the means. And I could afford to buy land and put in the capital. It's a very happy partnership. So they live in Pune, I live in Bombay, but we have an interaction almost on a daily basis. And just as a hobby, nothing more, just to prove my point that we can be we can grow good vegetables without the help of pesticides and fertilizers and make it healthier part of healthier living. I took up this project. It's now about 3 years since we've been doing it, and it's been an interesting journey all throughout because it it tells you again, as I said, first of all, how to live with nature because you are exposed. If you put pesticides and you put fertilizers, you are virtually killing, in that sense, the imponderables of nature because they take care of the weeds and the pests and the this and the that and the climate and whatever. As I said, even to grow roses in Bombay, despite that climate being totally adverse to it, you could completely override it by the use of fertilizers and pesticides. Similarly, with vegetables, it doesn't matter whether it's a hot day today or a cold day today, or the weather has suddenly changed, or it has rained suddenly, or there is a frost. Everything can be got over with the help of this. But it destroys the soil, it takes away all its nutrients, and it keeps ridding the soil of the nutrients year after year. So the idea was to make the soil self-sufficient, to grow plants in that way, avoid the use of pesticides. And now there is a move towards organic consumption of organic produce. So I'm happy to see that. My idea, of course, was to motivate my neighboring farmers, but I can assure you it's very difficult. Whatever government may say, it is very difficult because they are at subsistence level. They cannot afford even one crop going bad. People like us do it for lark, for a lark or for a hobby. We can afford to, lose a crop or two or three, but they cannot. And that's why you have a perennial problem of farmer loans and repayment and stuff like that and insure. There's nothing like crop insurance. There is no ready market for them. They cannot uh, keep their produce. There is no cold storages available. There is no power half the time. So you have to get to the village level to understand the problems which the farmers face. And I think that has motivated me. I could go on forever, but I don't
Yeah,
want to bore people to death. I think I've said enough.
So
super.
you clearly have a green thumb, and there's a pun there because it's not just about the money that you've earned; it's
Yeah.
also about the plants and the and the produce that you're managing to grow.
I
So
think
there's
it's
a
a
pun.
giving back to society, in some way. I mean, I can't cultivate the whole of India, but if I can save 4 acres of land from
Correct.
from fertilizers, that's my contribution. Let's
Why
put
not?
it that way.
Sure, sure. Super.
Super. And I think on that note, we'll move over to the demonstration round as well. So I think we're moving more into your personal hobbies. So Tanisha will take over now and do the demo round with you before she
Thanks.
starts the interrogation.
Thanks, Vikas.
Thanks, Vikas.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So now it's just you and me, Mr. Dwarkadas. Are you ready?
I'm scared.
Look, a man who can enchant the courtrooms the way you do, I'm nothing to, I'm a nobody. So don't worry about it. Okay. So our next round for our audience, it's called the demonstration round, where Mr. Dwarkadas is either going to display a skill or something he's very good at, or just something he simply really enjoys, which is in the confines of his home right now. So Mr. Dwarkadas, what do you have for us today?
Well, let me hold up to you, if you can see,
Sure.
a small talent which I.
Yes, can see. Oh
Can
wow,
you
that's
see
a
it or you
sketch.
can't?
Yeah, it's roses that are sketched, right?
Yes, it's a pencil sketch of some of the roses I used to grow
Oh,
when I was a child.
oh wow.
And this is a sketchbook which I used to maintain. It's
Okay.
probably in tatters now, but it has some of the artwork
And this is all sketched by you, is it?
yeah, it was done
Oh,
when
fantastic.
when I was in my college or school days. So
So this
this
is
is one
how
talent.
old would this be roughly?
Sorry,
How old are these sketches roughly?
they would be in somewhere in the late 60s and 70s.
Oh wow. So do you
And there
still
is
sketch?
no, unfortunately, I don't. There is one painting which is a
Mhm.
watercolor,
Okay.
which you might see just above me.
Right
I don't
above.
know.
Yes.
Can you see it now?
Yes, yes, can see this. So there are two birds on
Branch.
tree, or yeah, on a branch essentially, right?
Yeah. So
Yes,
that's a
can.
watercolor that I had
Okay.
done. It's just behind me. I mean, as I'm sitting, you can probably
Right.
see it. So this is what I
The
used
hidden
to do
skill. The
when
hidden skill.
yeah. So when I had more time to devote to my own problems rather than other people's, if I may put it that way.
Fair. Okay. So clearly, with this demonstration, we know that you can be as creative as you can be logical and analytical, which is the good news. It's going to help you in your next round. So, our next round is called the interrogation. It's essentially
Interrogation.
the
Okay.
interrogation. It's essentially a rapid fire, but we've given it a legal spin so that lawyers like you vibe with it better, and hopefully will be more impulsive, and we'd encourage you to be impulsive and quick-witted, as you're known to be. Not impulsive, the quick-witted part, right? So are you ready for this? And this has to go super fast. Okay, you don't have too much time to think. Are you ready?
Okay.
Okay, you can't take long pauses. Is that acceptable?
Whatever you say, you are the director of the movie, so I have to go by
Okay,
what you tell me.
super. Okay, good. So your first question then, under the interrogation round, Mr. Dwarkadas: if you woke up as a law firm partner tomorrow morning,
As
what would
a
you, as a law firm partner tomorrow
okay.
morning, what is the first thing you would do?
The first thing I would do is get to know my team and get to know their strengths and weaknesses, because as a leader, it's very important to know the people you have and how to get the best out of them.
That is so well said. If I could stand, I would stand and do like a bit of innovation. But thank you. That's a super answer. And there's a lot of messaging there actually for a lot of our lawyer friends in the community. Moving on, next question. What makes you really laugh? Like what can I do or say that will really make you laugh?
Crack a joke that's unprintable.
I will call you separately to do this. It's a bit of it's my specialization, if I will, right? So
So
I'll
we'll
talk
get
to you.
along well then.
I look forward to that chat offline. Okay, my next question then: can you name any three songs which are there on your daily music playlist, or weekly if it's not daily?
Uh, I can tell you the kind of music I have on my playlist
Please,
daily.
please.
So
Sure.
one would be what is called only piano, which I listen to when I'm having my tea in the morning and doing my yoga in the evening. I love
Okay.
piano. I wish I could play that instrument.
Okay.
The other is any kind of easy listening music. It does not. It could be a song or I like songs with good lyrics. So
Okay.
that would be definitely there. And the third is I love to listen to unplugged old Hindi songs because they have less of background music and more emphasis on the rhythm
The
and the words.
rhythm, right? So acoustics is what you find engaging.
I find I give more importance to lyrics and the words than to the background, because sometimes the background drowns out the words.
Correct, correct. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. Your next question then: if someone is aspiring to join your chamber and comes in with cake or maybe some home cooked food that you really enjoy to an interview, what would you do?
But I'll take the gift, but make it very clear it's not going to make me change my mind. I think I'm reminded of Chagla, Chief Justice, who was sitting with a judge, an English judge, and there was a
Right.
sack full of potatoes that came to their house that morning.
Okay.
And the English judge told Chagla, said, do you know that this fellow, this blackguard, sent us a sack full of potatoes? So Chagla said, yes, I do. Why? I promptly sent it back. He says, you're a fool. I kept it, but it's not going to change my mind.
So that nice. Well done. Okay. Moving on to the next question. Give us three words you think your
45
friends would use. Can you give us, I'm sorry about that interruption. Can you give us three words that your friends would use to describe you?
Why don't you ask yourself, since you claim to be a good friend now, and rather than my being immodest and talking about how my friends would describe me?
Not yet, Mr. Dwarkadas, not till we've had our offline chat. So now you answer this one.
Yeah,
Please.
I would say kind-hearted, patient, hardworking, maybe. I
Okay.
don't know.
Okay, nice. Thank you. Next one then. Which animal do you think you resemble the most and why?
Animal.
Yes.
I would say a horse.
Okay.
And why? Because a horse can trot, a horse can canter, a horse can gallop, and horse can change pace according to the requirements of the rider.
Right.
And probably that's what life and the profession is really all about, to be able to adapt to the change in pace.
Super. So you clearly know a lot about horses. Do you own any? Do you own any?
No, but my son is a polo player, Rahul.
Oh,
So,
okay.
but
Okay.
I love horses.
You
I love.
do. Okay. Okay. Super. So next question then. India in 1990 or India in 2020?
India in 2020.
And why?
Because it has taught us, hopefully it has taught us that never ever take nature for granted. Hopefully it has taught us. I don't know whether you read an article by Thomas Friedman, who's a columnist for the New York Times, who says, is Mr. Trump trying to have a duel with nature? And he ends by saying, well, if he is, let him know that in 4.5 billion years, nobody has lost a duel to nature.
Wow. No, you're right. Nature is rebelling at so many levels. We can see it in different forms now. So yes, you're right. Hopefully we will learn. Okay. Thank you for that answer. Next one. If you were not a lawyer, you would be a dash.
Gentleman farmer.
Oh, okay. Nice. Which you're already an aspiring, well, you're a semi-farmer, aspiring farmer.
Semi.
Semi-farmer. Okay. So this one is a bit controversial. So think carefully before you answer this one. It may cost you work or it may bring you lots of work. Okay. You always read the papers before a matter. True or false?
False.
Okay,
Because I used to, I don't need to.
nice. I used to. I don't need to. Very powerful. Okay, we know you love your you've got a need for speed and you enjoy bikes and cars. So name your dream bike or car model.
Sorry, just come again.
We know you enjoy your cars and bikes and
Ah,
enjoy speeding. So name your favorite like dream car or bike model.
it would have to be a Rolls Royce. I mean, it's the most perfect car ever made, according to me. That would
Wow.
be the ultimate. That would be the ultimate. And
Shall I go ahead and
if you see a YouTube video on how much effort goes into the making of a Rolls Royce and the and the options that a customer has, who wants a prospective customer has,
right.
it is mind blowing.
Oh,
Mind
wow.
blowing.
Okay, we should check this out then. Thank you. So have you booked yours yet?
No, I don't think Bombay can afford a. I don't
Afford a
think it's
Rolls
best
Royce.
to have a
So
Rolls
the,
Royce.
so the good part for us to note is that Mr. Dwarkadas can afford a Rolls Royce. Bombay City is the problem. Am I right?
Exactly,
Just clarify that.
exactly.
Okay, good stuff. Okay, that's great. Moving on to your next question. If you could meet any 3 famous personalities from the dead, who would you
From
want
the
to meet?
dead.
From the dead, from the dead,
Huh.
yeah. Who would?
All three would be women. It would be
Interesting.
Devika Rani, Ingrid Bergman, and Madhubala, because they had the
Lovely.
most expressive eyes, and they were thorough professionals. I would love to meet them if I
Super,
could.
super, super. Okay, thank you. Moving on. What is the most spontaneous thing you've ever done?
Proposed and married twice.
Nice. Okay. If you had a choice between being invisible or being able to read minds, which one would you pick and why?
I would want to read minds because, as I said, it gives you a deep insight into human thinking and human feelings.
Okay. And I would want to be invisible. So if I were invisible and you were reading minds, so I walk into a room, you
I
wouldn't
won't
know
be
whose
able to
mind
read
you're.
your
No,
mind.
you'd be able to read my mind, but you won't know whose mind you're reading, right? Okay. So moving on then, what are your 3 favorite foods to
Three
eat?
favorite?
Food, like items, food items that you really enjoy eating.
Cakes, ice creams, chocolates, and as they say, everything that you like is either unhealthy or married.
Okay, then. Good to know. So you've got a bit of a sweet tooth there. Okay. We know you love to travel, Mr. Dwarkadas. So, what are the 5 things you check for before you head out on a leisure trip?
First, it would have to be nature related. It would not be my priority would not be a city. It
Okay.
would always be something to do with nature.
Okay.
Then accessibility. Then, of course, choice of food,
Sure.
um, good accommodation, and preferably, I would like to do wherever I am a road trip if I can,
Okay.
and bit of trekking if that is available.
Super. Okay. Understood. Next question. This is a situational one we've made up. Okay. It's never going to happen to you, I assure you. But if it were to happen, I want to see how you're going to respond. So you're in a foreign country. You don't speak the language. You're wrongfully arrested for mistaken identity. You don't have your phone or wallet on you. What are you going to do?
I would use sign language and call for a local lawyer who hopefully will take some pity on me and won't charge me what I charge others.
Should the law of karma kick in, that would be a problem. Okay, that's a good one. Moving on to your next question. If you could have your own talk show, who would you invite as the first guest?
Amir Khan,
Amir Khan.
I
Okay,
like the way he thinks
you
and the
like
way
to
he
think.
speaks.
Okay, super. What tells you the most about a person, Mr. Dwarkadas?
Tells you the most about
A person. So when you meet somebody,
the
what is
eyes,
it?
the eyes, the
The
eyes.
eyes. Okay. That takes me back to Madhubala and all the other women. That,
Yes,
that explains that answer. Okay,
yes.
fair. What if you were to write an autobiography, what do you think it would be titled?
What do you think will be title?
Mm-hmm.
Depend on the dependables.
Depend on the dependables. Wow. Okay. Very powerful.
It's my
What?
favorite line.
Okay. What would be your, if I were to ask you your favorite chamber tradition, what is it?
End of term lunches.
End of term lunches. Okay. And my last question then before I let you off, sorry, second last, what is the best advice you've ever heard?
The best advice I ever got was from the former Advocate General and the former Attorney General Ghulam Vanwati.
Okay.
Learn to say no.
That is the best advice you've got.
Yeah,
And why do you think that that's important? Why is it important to say no?
because when you are doing well, and when you people want to brief you, and it's very hard to say no. Your ego will come in your way,
Correct.
and you shouldn't bite more than you can chew.
Fair. Understood. Okay. Thank you. So the last question then, this is again refocusing on us, please don't mind. Now that you've been through this drill on the Unsuited, who would you recommend as our next guest for this chat show?
My own senior, Iqbal Chagla,
Wonderful.
who's
I
been
was
my friend, philosopher, guide, and the most inspiration behind whatever I am today.
super, super. So I'm guessing you're going to drop him a message or make a call after this this interview is over.
I hope he says yes. I don't. I'm just, since you asked me who you would recommend, I'm saying it would be him, but I hope he says yes.
Okay, so that's where your lawyering skills are going to be put to test to convince your own senior to come on a show that is as unconventional as this. Okay, so we're banking on you. But jokes aside, it's been very enjoyable talking to you, Mr. Dwarkadas. Thank you for all your candidness, for your honesty, for sharing as openly as you have shared some very, very intimate stories and some very fun stories as well. It's been really nice getting to know Janak Dwarkadas, the person versus just the lawyer. I truly hope our audiences have enjoyed it as much as we've enjoyed the process. And this will all be available later on YouTube. So for anyone who's missed this, they can definitely watch it later. I will send you the links as well, Mr. Dwarkadas.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and thanks for the patient time that everybody has taken the time off to listen to this, giving me the opportunity to talk to all of you.
I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did.
I did. I thoroughly did.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, signing off then. Have a good evening. Thank you, sir. Thanks everyone for watching. Bye.